All right, folks. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I got kicked off somehow and messed up there. This technology can get you down. What I was just trying to say is that you have the folks. You have the first soil, which is the rocky, the well-worn path. Where the seed can't take root, can't even, it's ignored, or it is quickly taken up by the birds or by Satan. And you have representations of this with the scribes, the Pharisees, the folks from Jerusalem coming, and just when they hear Jesus talking, they even imagine that what he's saying and doing is coming from Satan, not from God. So their way of thinking and their way where they're at is completely, out of tune with what Jesus is doing in their midst. There's a great quote about them from one of the campesinos in Solentiname, which is from this book, The Gospel in Solentiname, by Ernesto Cardenal, who was a Christian priest and poet, part of the Nicaraguan Revolution, who just read through the Gospels with folks from that, I guess island is probably the best way to describe Solentiname, and Thomas's son Felipe says this: that seed fell near the road where the ground was walked on, because everybody passes by. It happens with people who have their minds closed by propaganda. They're walked on. They believe what everybody tells them, and then the message of the kingdom doesn't get through to them. They receive the message if they come here, but they go home, they forget it as soon as they turn on the radio. So I think we are sympathetic to that. There are people, we have maybe even been those people in our lifetime, that they're so tuned into what the world is telling them, what the propaganda is out there, that they are unable to hear God's word speaking, God's truth, God's desires moving in their life, because they're so captured by the propaganda, the storyline, whatever you want to call it, that's out there in the world, whether that's based on hyper-capitalistic consumerism, whether it's based on some kind of understanding of military might, or some kind of understanding of national exceptionalism, whatever that myth is. It can mean that you are not, your ears are not tuned to hear the different story that's coming from God, and God's voice. So that's the first soil. The second one talks about how the seed, the word, can take root in the soil, but it's rocky soil. And as soon as trouble, or as the sun comes up, as soon as persecutions come, people fall away. Now, the shocking kind of thing about this parable and the way it works in this moment and with this is that the clearest example of this comes later in the gospel with the disciples themselves, who drop everything to follow Jesus, but by the time of the crucifixion and the threat of persecution there, they have turned away. And in Mark's community, with the threat of persecution for them, they are risking the same type of scenario. We also have just heard in the gospel how Jesus's own family members seem to be skirting with being this kind of soil themselves in some way when the risk of what Jesus is doing seems too much to them, and they try to get him to stop. So troubling in the sense that, again, the bad soil predominates. We have a hard time being the people of the good soil, and that's just unfortunately a reality in our lives. When it doesn't work for the religious people of the day or the disciples necessarily, it seems hard. And then when just as it seems to be getting kind of disappointing, we come along with the seed that is thrown amongst the thorns, and Jesus explains that as let me get the wording right. What is it? The worries of this age, the lure of wealth, and all other passions. Right? The corruption of affluence. How that will get you in a place where you are so distracted and disturbed by these things that you are unable to allow what God is doing in the world to grow in you, to flourish in you, to bear fruit. And in the gospel, there's clearly a few examples of this with the rich young ruler who seems to really catch on and want to be a part of what Jesus is doing, but when asked to give up his wealth and to let go of the lure of wealth, can't do it. And shortly after that, Jesus talks about how the prospects for those who are wealthy of entering the kingdom are quite slight and not so great. And so again, and then I think it's here too that one of the commentators talks about how this is partly true with Herod in the story of John the Baptist as well, where Herod seems to be somewhat attracted to what John is saying, tries to keep him alive, but is lured by the passions and the power of his position and by his wife and her daughter to take John's life. And then, of course, you have the good soil, which is kind of just this what some people would call a kind of a hopeful afterthought there in the mix at the end. And this, again, and these two, the parable and explanation are sandwiched in between with the quotes from Isaiah, which again seem rather disappointing about how, basically it doesn't seem like people will listen. It seems, again, that the bad soil predominates. And I won't say much about that, but I think if you look at where that comes from in Isaiah 6, it is, Isaiah is expecting to not be heard in 6, but he's being encouraged to continue to proclaim, continue to preach, and continue to be about what God is calling him to, even in the midst of all of that. And this is where Dr. Blunt comes back in again, talking about, he doesn't say this, but I think it's more like, we it's not so much about reasoning why or where people are not hearing or what, but if you are someone who does have ears to hear and eyes to see what God is doing in the world, that you are being transformed and something is growing inside of you because of your interaction with with the Spirit in the world, then it is your responsibility to do something about it. To embrace that. I was trying to find where. So it says, Dr. Blunt says, the parables are not secrets for the few. That's not the intention here. Is to talk about how obscure they are and how they're trying to hide something. They are instead imperative demands which require a response of faith and actions, which replicate the kind of kingdom behavior that Jesus' preaching ministry has made manifest. So if you're hearing these things, if you're seeing what God is doing in the world, if you're being moved by the Spirit to catch on to the way of Jesus in the world, then you gotta step up. You gotta take action. You gotta roll with it. That's more about what's happening in these parables. And finally, just real quickly, I think that Ched Myers brings up a really good point about who the audience is and what these parables would have meant to people who actually might have been those who were agricultural workers, those who would sow for a living, and be underneath the system of large landowners that would rent out some space for them to sow. And this idea of this harvest coming back 6, 10, or 100-fold is an incredible just an incredible abundance. It's kind of like basically saying the possibility of us imagining what it would be like to win the lottery, like what it would mean for our indebtedness, what it would mean for the security and of our family and that sort of thing, our ability to have housing and to be free from anxiety and worry about all those kind of cares. That's the image that Jesus is painting with the reality of the good soil, is this just hyper abundance that would have freed you from debt, made sure that you and your children and your children's children were fed, and this sort of, maybe even brought your whole community together in a place of security and safety. We reduce this down to kind of like the spiritual notion of being born again or whatever, as the simple, understanding of what, being good soil might be, or whatever, receiving, the word. But we should not miss the material reality of what Jesus is saying, what Jesus is trying to get across. Jesus is trying to say that those of us who will embrace what God is doing in the world, not only does it bring us some kind of personal salvation or relationship with God, but it brings us into a place of appreciation and abundance and sharing and a life that we struggle to imagine. And it's precisely that imagining that keeps people away from being the good soil. It's the way that all of our imagination has been warped and changed and diminished by the world that we live in. Sorry, my phone's ringing. I think that part of what this this parable is doing, and part of what Jesus' whole ministry is about, is trying to help people to get a vision of what God is trying to do. This vision of wholeness and abundance, and breaking down of barriers that divide, and a land, right, that is flourishing and productive. Yeah. So real quickly, the only thing I really want to add to this, and it may seem kind of tangential and off the track, maybe a little bit, but I think that what's been kind of rattling around in my head as I've been thinking about this good soil and good land is what's happening right now in, the land where Jesus trod and walked around, and what's happening in Jerusalem, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in these places, and how we as Christians, we as people who are meant to be tuning our ears to what God is doing in the world, what God is calling for, what God is up to, how it seems so obvious that the way the storyline that's being fed to us, the narrative that we're supposed to hear and just believe, blocks out so much of what the other realities are in the world. And in fact, one would argue is, what is the thing before the story that we often hear. And so I just want to kind of drop in, I want to drop in this link to this woman's channel, she's a Christian. She has a YouTube channel called African Esquire. She does some incredible work on different situations in different African countries, and just keeps is a very good source for hearing about what's going on in different places in Africa. But she put out a video recently about what's going on in Israel and Palestine, how it relates to the church. She kind of focuses some on the Black church because that's her experience, but I think it relates definitely to white churches as well. How we have kind of bought hook, line, and sinker this narrative about who Israel is and what Israel as the current country or nation, what they are, and somehow tried to relate that back to the Bible story and make all kinds of meaning out of that's not there. Meanwhile, there are Palestinian Christians, which are highlighted in this, those living in Bethlehem in particular, who are, what we would call facing persecution, who are, having their lives, having their lives truncated and oppressed. And that's not even including, the Muslim people of and Christians of Gaza and other places in Palestine. It's a situation that we are deaf to, because the particular ideology, the particular way that the news works, only presents us with one side of the story, or a very limited range of what the story is. So I'm going to put a link to her video in the chat, and just I encourage you to watch it, at least give it a listen, to get a hearing, because what we have to be listening for is what we know is the way of Jesus in the world. That is what we're trying to hear. That's the soil that we're trying to be, that we're trying to be, and how we're trying to let who Jesus was and what Jesus brought us and showed us and lived among us to fruition in our own lives. And just buying into, a certain narrative that excludes, the imprisonment, the terror, the occupation of a whole group of people, what has been labeled by Human Rights Watch apartheid, to allow that to go on. So anyway, sorry. So I think that this parable is helpful for us in many ways to remember that the bad soil predominates. If you are not getting a full spectrum of a narrative, it's because someone doesn't want you to have it, and you become like the hard soil of the road. There's as the guy in this, as the guy was saying in this book, you become so deaf to everything because of the propaganda and the storyline that you're being fed, that you can't hear what God is doing in your midst. So anyway, so thanks everybody. Sorry about the weird, I don't know what happened there that knocked everything out, but I think we came back and it all worked out all right. I guess I should say a little something about the end of that part of the chapter. You get the mustard seed metaphor. You get a couple of instances where the Jesus of Mark's Jesus leaves us with these kind of images of hope and encouragement to endure through hard times, but to know that even the smallest little glimmer of light, or I think Dr. Blunt would say even the smallest pocket of resistance, pocket of kingdom intervention that we can bring and we can participate in, that God is bringing, I guess is the better way to say it. Even the smallest little thing can be a place that people can put people can put their hopes in, that we can put our hopes in, and we can see it become something much bigger. And that's the kind of patient, everyday work that we need to do. All right. All right. I don't know. I see Marcy has a comment. I don't know if she's talking about the same person I'm talking about, or something else. But we'll figure it out. All right. Thanks, everybody. I will see you next week. We're going to jump into the very end of chapter 4 and then move into chapter 5. I don't know whether we'll get to the pigs running over the side of the mountain, of the cliff or not, but we'll see how far we get. And I will see you all later. Bye-bye.